Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for coming, everyone. As you may be aware, Pakistan recently announced that it will host World Environment Day 2021 in partnership with the UN Environment Programme. This year's observance of World Environment Day on June 5th will be on the theme of ecosystem restoration and focus on resetting our relation with nature. It will also mark the formal launch of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration from 2021 to 2030. World Environment Day takes place every year and is the UN's flagship day for promoting worldwide awareness and action for the environment. Over the years, it has grown to be the largest global platform for environmental public outreach and is celebrated by millions of people around the world. Today, we have an exciting panel lined up to discuss this upcoming event. I would like to invite the Honorable Minister Malik Amin Aslam, Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on Climate Change, to the stage. Ms. Inger Anderson, the Executive Director, the UN Environment Programme, will be joining us online. And Knut Hospi, the UNDP Resident Rep in Pakistan, I would like to invite him to the stage. And Ms. Nahi Durrani, Secretary, Ministry of Climate Change. And Mr. Nabil Munir, the Additional Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, if you could kindly join us. And Ms. Roxana Nabil, Parliamentary Secretary, Climate Change. Please join us on the stage. And I'd like to start the event by inviting Mr. Nabil Munir, the Additional Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to the podium.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Excellency Mr. Malik Amin Aslam, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Climate Change. Excellency Roxana Nabi, Parliamentary Secretary, the Secretary for Climate Change, Ms. Inger Anderson, Executive Director, UNEP, Excellency Knut Hospi, the Resident Representative of UNDP, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by apologizing on behalf of the Foreign Secretary who was supposed to come, but he could not do so because of some prior commitments. It gives me immense pleasure to speak at today's press briefing regarding the Unep, United Nations Environment Day 2021 that will be hosted by Pakistan in partnership with UNEP. The idea of hosting the UN Environment Day in Pakistan initially emerged in Nairobi last year during a bilateral meeting between the Honorable Foreign Minister and Ms. Inger Anderson. The proposal was later explored in detail by our ambassador in Nairobi with the UNEP Secretariat, and I am really thankful to our colleagues in the Ministry of Climate Change, the Foreign Office, and UNEP itself for the hard work in turning the camera ke samne aa raha. Ladies and gentlemen, we are passing through the most challenging time in human history. Climate change and environment degradation are posing unprecedented threat to mankind. Though the negative impacts of environmental deterioration and climate change are global in scale, developing countries are the worst affected. According to German Watch, Pakistan, for instance, is among the top 10 countries impacted by climate change, triggering 90% of natural disasters over the past 2 decades. There is an urgent need to galvanize global action to address environmental challenges, including plastic pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and biodiversity loss. In this context, observance of the UN Environment Day 21 with Pakistan as its global host is doubly important. We believe the UN Environment Day 2021, being the largest global platform for environmental public outreach, will be instrumental in raising public awareness and mobilizing environmental action at the global level. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's observance of the UN Environment Day is even more important as it will also mark the formal launch of UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration 2021-2030, aimed at massively scaling up the restoration of degraded and destroyed ecosystems to combat environmental issues, inter alia, climate change, biodiversity loss, and weed spread. The theme of this year's Environment Day, Ecosystem Restoration, is perfectly aligned with the Prime Minister of Pakistan's Green Vision as manifested in the country's flagship Environment Ecosystem Restoration Initiative. The 10 billion tsunami project, the comprehensive plastic ban, the Clean Green Pakistan Index, the Recharge Pakistan project, and the e-vehicle policy are some of the actions on ground that are a reflection of Pakistan's commitment to playing its role in addressing global environmental issues through ecosystem restoration. I hope that celebrating the World Environment Day 2021 with Pakistan will achieve its desired objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. I now request Ms. Nahi Durrani, the Secretary of the Ministry of Climate Change, to please say a few words, and please remain seated.
Special Assistant to the Prime Minister for Climate Change, the Parliamentary Secretary, UNDP country head, dignitaries, media colleagues, officers, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. It is indeed a huge opportunity, an honor and a privilege for Pakistan to be hosting the World Environment Day in the current year in June. This opportunity provides us an ample space to be able to showcase the work that the government of Pakistan has been undertaking on environment and on climate change, especially in the last few years. This is an opportunity for us to be not only able to exhibit that work with evidences and with a lot of on-ground activities, but also an opportunity for us to engage with a larger cohort of global community in terms of exchange of information, in terms of understanding from one another as to how is it that we're moving ahead on the environment and global climate change agenda in a more inclusive manner. Because the challenge before the world community is how is it that we embed the environment solutions into people-centric solutions, and how is it that move ahead on the challenges of economic development as well as addressing the very core environment and climate change challenges. Pakistan, as we all know by now, has come out as a big leader, and it is being acknowledged to be a leader as far as work on environment as well as climate change is concerned. Despite our constraints, despite the context and dimension of our demography, the current government has been very sensitive and has been very forthcoming as far as the climate change agenda is concerned. As referred by my colleague in the Foreign Office, by now Pakistan has some very strong work activities on ground that are being now globally acknowledged. The policy announcements as well as the policy actions taken by the government on energy are almost transformative. And while these are beneficial for our own country, we are very confident that these actions actually put us in a center stage of the global action on climate. For instance, the commitment to reduce the footprint of fossil fuels in the energy mix is something that is bold for a country of our size and a country of our context, which has a lot of development agenda, which has a massive youth population. So in a way, when we move away from the conservative and the existing frameworks to the newer ones, it does have implications. It has cost implications, it has investment implications. Despite this, the policy actions on energy made, and also as mentioned, the announcement of an EV policy for introducing electric vehicles in the country is also very pioneering in the sense that we already have an conventional auto framework and an economic presence that makes it very challenging to shift, but despite that, the government has taken bold steps. The most outstanding work that the government is undertaking at present is the 10 billion tree tsunami. And while it is aimed to help us be a leader in terms of sinking of global emissions, but nevertheless it has largely environmental related solutions. We are number one pitched to increase our green footprint. We have a lot of work that we are doing in terms of conservation, biodiversity, and overall enhancing our protected areas coverage. We are going big on it, and we will require international community's support to be able to help us sustain the pace that we have undertaken on the agenda of 10 billion trees tsunami. I would at this moment like to say that allowing or giving Pakistan an opportunity to host this event, the World Environment Day, in itself to us is a big signal of the global community that they're already acknowledging the work that we are doing on ground. But this is also an opportunity for us to exchange ideas on how we can make this work more sustainable, for which we are expecting international support in multiple ways, especially transfer of technology and also helping us take more robust steps, which I'm sure the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister is going to speak about. Let me thank the UNEP for their consistent support to Pakistan. Let me extend a warm thank you to Ms. Anderson herself for being very supportive to Pakistan, and we commit to not only hold this event in a very robust and in a very committed manner, but we would continue to work on the environment and climate change agenda as a responsible member of the global committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rani. Next, I would like to request Kanood Ospi, the UNDP resident rep in Pakistan, to say a few words. And please remain seated because in this COVID era, we have to sort of,
Excellency, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister of Climate Change, Parliamentary Secretary, Secretary of Climate Change, Executive Director of Unep, Additional Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, thank you so much for inviting me to be here, and congratulations again to Pakistan on taking on this momentous task of hosting this year's World Environment Day. It is on the theme, as other people have already said, on ecosystem restoration, and focuses on resetting our relationship with nature. I would like to quote the Executive Director of Unep in the global announcement for this, where she said that 2020 was a year of reckoning, facing multiple crises, including a global pandemic and the continued crisis of climate, nature, and pollution. And in 2021, we must take deliberate steps to move from crisis to healing. She says this better than I could, so forgive me the quote, even though you're also in the meeting. Pakistan's announcement of hosting this World Environment Day will help raise awareness globally as well as in the public in Pakistan, and will give a clear message to the global community of its seriousness to resolve the global threat of climate change. It's envisaged that in the decades 2021 to 2030, there will also be some very positive impacts of ecosystem restoration. That the restoration of 350 million hectares of degraded terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems could generate $9 trillion in ecosystem services. The economic benefits of such intervention could exceed 10 times the cost of their investments. So inaction is not an option. I think it's pertinent to mention that the programs launched by the government of Pakistan during the last few years, which already have been mentioned, have revolutionized the environmental movement in Pakistan. Just one example is the Billion Tree Tsunami project, which is already a huge success and is on track to enhance forest cover in the whole country. Similarly, the Green Pakistan program, Recharge Pakistan, and other initiatives are also contributing to better environmental management in Pakistan. But Pakistan is among the top 10 vulnerable countries in respect to climate change vulnerability. In 2020, the German Watch report reviewed Pakistan as the 5th most vulnerable country to the impact of climate change, indicating that the country has suffered economic losses worth 3.8 billion from 1998 to 2018. So clearly, much more is needed. But Pakistan is working hard, as I mentioned, to combat this threat of climate change. It has recently launched a protected area initiative to develop 15 model protected areas across the country to cover 7,300 square kilometers of land and creating green jobs. The United Nations will, of course, extend its full support to the government for this and other initiatives to combat climate change. The government and the UN are long-standing partners in many areas on climate change, be it on policy formulation or on-the-ground measures, and we will continue to build our partnership as we go forward. One example is that we work with the government to help create the climate change policy in 2012, which is now under revision, and we will continue to give this kind of support whenever requested, and we very much value the great partnership that we have. With that, let me congratulate and thank you again for planning to host the World Environment Day this year. And like also with other projects, we are looking forward to providing whatever support could be useful from our side to make this event a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Osby. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Inger Anderson, the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program. She can be seen here on the screen.
Let me start out by greeting Honorable Malika Aslam Khan, Special Assistant, and really a strong proponent and voice for the environment, Special Advisor, of course, to the Prime Minister. Let me also greet you, Madam Secretary Mahit Durrani, Amir Khurram Khatore, as well as Nabil Munir, Ruxana Wahid, and Knut, my colleague. It is a pleasure to be here with everyone. And let me remind you maybe that in 1972, 49 years ago, on the 5th of June, the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment took place. That was a very conference that took the decision to establish the United Nations Environment Program. And it is for this reason that the 5th of June has become the World Environment Day. And we are very honored to be hosting this day this year in Pakistan. So let me first then thank you, Honorable Minister, for inviting us to come to your country, as well as obviously the Honorable Minister for Foreign Affairs who started the conversation about a year ago. And I would like to very much also thank the people of Pakistan for this kind offer. The theme, as we have heard, is indeed ecosystem restoration. an issue and a priority that Pakistan has worked on intensively for some years with significant success. Pakistan is really integral to global efforts to combat the three interconnected crises that we speak of in the United Nations Environment Program: the climate crisis, the nature and biodiversity crisis, and the pollution and waste crisis. In Pakistan, like in many other countries, these crises are manifested in air and water pollution, in erosive land use practices, in desertification, and in extreme weather events. And as we just heard, this recent study that to which Ms. Osby referred lists Pakistan as the fifth most vulnerable to climate change in the world. That means that Pakistan is on the receiving end of efforts that they have not contributed much to in terms of CO2 emissions. The global restorations of ecosystems to their former glory is therefore key to addressing the crisis that I mentioned and to keep in check our consumption and production of land and water, etc., and to help the Earth's systems restabilize. Restoration of ecosystems is our single largest nature-based opportunity for climate change mitigation. On this year's World Environment Day, 5th June, we will be formally launching a decade of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. Together with Pakistan and through the World Environment Day platform, we hope to be making a global call for the protection and the revival of ecosystems around the world in recognition of how ecosystems are critical for nature, but certainly also for people. The science is absolutely clear. The 10 years of this decade will be of paramount importance to fight and avert climate change and the loss of nature and biodiversity. As we commence that decade in 2021, on the 5th of June, it is vital that we all grasp and acknowledge the restoration's mission, if you like. It is an enormous task that is too big for any one organization, any one country, or indeed for states to do on their own. It takes an all-of-society approach and an all-of-the-world approach. As we move towards the celebration of the 5th of June, let me also thank member states who have shown interest to financially contribute towards the implementation of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, and in particular financial support that Unep has been receiving to this end, but we know we will be receiving from others too, from Finland and Germany for its launch. This World Environment Day 2021, for which Pakistan will be the official host, we hope to couple the rallying cry for the protection and revival of ecosystem with actions. And here Pakistan has already exhibited what actions can look like. With much of nature being on life support, we need to find inspiration wherever it resuscitates. Such encouragement can indeed be drawn from Pakistan's 10 billion tree tsunami program to restore forests and wildlife, and from citizen initiatives across Pakistan working to green both the rural and the urban landscapes. Such initiatives reflect the ambition and action needed by nations, by businesses and international organizations and individuals to enhance people's livelihoods, to counteract climate change, and to start rebuilding our collapsing economies due to COVID. I truly commend Pakistan for its leadership, and I very much look forward to the 2021 World Environment Day and the official launch of the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration on 5th of June. Thank you very much.
As host of World Environment Day, Pakistan will highlight environmental issues and showcase the country's own initiatives and its role in global efforts. I would now like to invite the SAPM Malik Amin Aslam to give us details about this upcoming event. And following his speech, we will have question and answer session. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellency Inger Anderson, the Executive Director of Unep, honorable ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Let me first of all start by thanking Unep for providing the opportunity to Pakistan to host the World Environment Day in 2021. As Inger mentioned, this movement was started in 1972 with the Stockholm Convention, And the World Environment Day actually started from 1974, with 5th of June being probably the most important day of the year for the environment all across the world. So it's a big honor for Pakistan to be hosting the World Environment Day on the 5th of June in 2021. The decade of ecosystem restoration was a decision that was made about, I think, a year back. And ironically, it has come at just the right time. Because as we're all living through this challenging time of the COVID, we've all realized that there is no future without ecosystem restoration. If the world has to survive, and if humankind has to survive, they have to make peace with nature. And I think this is the strongest message that has come out of the last year and the challenge that we've all collectively faced. The COVID era has taught us that nature has boundaries and nature has thresholds. And if we push those thresholds, nature is going to react. And we've seen it in the zoonotic disease that spread in the COVID era. And we've also seen it in the biodiversity loss that is happening, as well as the climate crisis that we all collectively face. Secondly, there is also a message of hope. And the message of hope is that there is a different pathway possible. The green pathway or the green recovery that we all talk about is also possible, and the world has seen that during the COVID era. So I think this, as I said, the decade of ecosystem restoration starting on June 5th could not have come at a better time. And it is a signal for the world to take that pathway of green recovery. So we would be very, very glad that Pakistan would be in the center of that message to go across the world of a green future for the world. And I say this because the year 2020, which is the year that we just lived through, was supposed to be a super year for nature, because we had the COP, the Glasgow COP on climate change happening, with the Paris Agreement coming into place. We had the biodiversity COP happening in Beijing, with in China, with the Aichi targets finishing off, and then the new targets being negotiated. And we had the World Congress of the IUCN planned for 2020. All three of these meetings are now planned for 2021. So we all hope that this is going to be that super year for nature, in which we are also going to be in the middle of it on June 5th by initiating the decade of ecosystem restoration. And I'm glad that Pakistan is already on that pathway of green recovery. We decided as a country and as a political government that if Pakistan is to face up to the challenges, including the climate challenge that we face in Pakistan, we have to rely on nature-based solutions. And so we took up that mantle in that billion-tree tsunami project in one of our provinces, KP province, which was very successful. And it is nature-based solutions that we are focusing on as we go into the green recovery. It was part of our green stimulus, which was announced in the COVID era by our Prime Minister Imran Khan, who put his faith into nature. And he put his faith into a recovery based on two big initiatives. One is the 10 billion tree tsunami, which is employing thousands of people, and it is resetting our relationship with nature. And he put his faith into the Protected Area Initiative, which is again an initiative which we announced during the COVID era. And we have been expanding our protected area, our national parks, nature reserves all over Pakistan. Just yesterday, I was with the Prime Minister when we announced 2 new national parks covering an area of 30,000 acres in this province of Punjab. And this shows that Pakistan is committed to this pathway. And we are not just talking, but we are trying to walk the talk also in Pakistan. Secondly, the associated issue with nature-based recovery is that we need to develop a financing framework which can help this ecosystem restoration decade. And that financing framework has to be different from the framework of the last decade. The framework of the last decade will not work in this next decade of ecosystem restoration. So we are already again working at a global level on different ideas, including with Unep and the World Bank, on natural capital valuation, on trying to value nature properly. And we will only protect this nature if we can value it properly, and to integrate that value into mainstream decision making. Pakistan is also a country which is about to launch its first green bond in the market to finance our renewable energy transition. This €500 bond is going to be launched by WAPDA as a green bond. We are also a country which is trying to pilot a nature bond, which can link the retirement of sovereign debt with quantifiable nature performance. So, as I said, the framework of the last decade has to change. The financing framework has to change if the decade of ecosystem restoration has to be successful. So, we are very happy to be at the center of it and to be very vocal about it as a strong voice for this decade of ecosystem restoration. So, I look forward to working with Unep, and we look forward to having Inger, who's not only a friend of Pakistan but also a personal friend, to be in Pakistan on 5th of June when we launch this decade for ecosystem restoration. And we look forward to taking this very strong message to the world, which needs this message right now, that there is no future without ecosystem restoration. Thank you very much.